Hi everybody, welcome to today's lesson where I'll be talking to you about how to effectively communicate with your research participants. So by the end of today's session, you should be clear about exactly who your target audience are. So in terms of C-level managers and so on. You should be clear about the things that you need to consider prior to contacting. So please remember, you can't just go out there and immediately start contacting people via email and so forth. Rather, you need to be very clear and systematic in the approach that you're going to adopt. And I'll give you some hints and techniques that you can use to do so today. Now, I'll also give you some good examples of effective research correspondence. So I'll talk you through all of the different elements that make up good research correspondence. I'll talk to you about salutations. I'll talk to you about the sorts of language that you should be providing. And I'll also talk to you about the kinds of information that you need to make clear to research participants in order for them to be able to provide informed consent to take part in your study, either in the audio and video interviews or in terms of filling out your surveys. And finally, I'll show some best practice examples from previous semesters and point you to where you can find templates of all of this on OneDrive. Now, remember, ultimately what we're trying to do is to gain insight into leadership skills and practices in the countries that you're investigating. And we're using a number of different research methods in order to collect that primary data. Both surveys, more quantitative-based methods, and also more qualitative-based research methods. So these are the video and audio interviews, okay? But in order to be able to complete this, of course, and gain access into those rich experiences and those extensive knowledge of these C-level managers and scholars, you need to know how to effectively communicate with them in order to secure their participation. That's what I'm going to help you with today. Now, these are the three different elements where you'll be using the primary data. So this is the what local respondents say section, the personal interview with a leadership scholar, and also the personal interview with a cross-cultural trainer or leadership consultant in your countries. This is primarily where you'll be writing about that information. But remember, as I said in previous sessions, you'll also be including really good, impactful quotes from the scholar and from the leadership consultant in other sections in your CP. So remember, ultimately the CP rises and falls based on the quality of the primary data that you cite in it. Okay, so it's really important that you communicate well and you get the best possible people to take part in your research. Now, you have the video interview and the audio interview. So the video interview is with a leadership consultant or a cross-cultural coach, and your audio interview is with a leadership scholar in your country. So remember, this is just an academic who is writing about your country, ideally who is based at a university and has extensive knowledge and experience of what leadership skills and practices are like. So there are different types of respondents that you need to be able to effectively communicate with. And I'll talk later about how you can do that. Now, you can, of course, go to YouTube and have a look at some of the example interviews from previous years with consultants and cross-cultural coaches and so forth. That will also help to give you an impression of what the final product should look like and also help you to see the sorts of questions that people ask, okay? And remember, you're trying to get as many survey respondents as possible. So 50 is the gold standard here at CCBS, okay? Now you're going to be using one questionnaire. All teams will be using one questionnaire, but you also have the opportunity to translate it into Qualtrics. And in textbook, that provides an explanation as to how you do that. And remember, if you have a native speaker in your team, or if you know a native speaker in the country that you're investigating on another team, they can both get bonus credits for translating your invitations to respondents. Again, this helps to make it local, and it can sometimes be a really effective way through which to secure people's participation. And as I've mentioned before, in the Download SurveyMonkey Tools folder in OneDrive, there are lots of best practice examples of templates, invitations, and so forth. So please check these out in your own time. This is SurveyMonkey here. This is an example of the kinds of questions that you will be asking of your respondents. But of course, we need to think more about who we're actually targeting before you can communicate with them. So again, to be clear, there are different sampling frames depending on the different types of data that you'll be collecting for your CPs. So for the survey, we're going to be using purposive sampling and snowball sampling because we're very clear about who we're targeting. And that is, we're targeting C-level leaders, C-level managers and executives in the countries that you are studying. So we know who we want to get, okay? You guys know in advance. So we want you to try and collect as many emails and as many other ways of contacting people as possible. But why we're here today is to talk about how to effectively communicate with those very people that are in your sampling frame, okay? And research correspondence in general tends to be kind of something which is ignored in the research process. It's not often viewed as a craft. And I think that's partly because all of us communicate so much every day that we see it as just being a taken for granted thing. So something that doesn't really require any effort or time on our behalf. But I actually think that's wrong. And I think you can see why that's the case because of very often the poor nature of a lot of research correspondence. It's often poorly written, and it also very often looks unprofessional. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid here when you guys are contacting your professionals. Because it leads to wasted effort on your behalf, and it also potentially leads to your participants saying, no thank you, I don't want to take part in this. So the message I really want you to think about as we proceed through the lecture today is that communication is often much harder than you think. You need to plan and prepare it in advance. That's what I'm going to help you with. Lucky for you. So the kind of advice I'm going to talk about today primarily refers to email, but please keep in mind that it's general advice that can apply to all different mediums of communication, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on LinkedIn and so forth. Albeit these particular modes of communication have sometimes specific criteria, such as character limits and so forth. Again, there are templates on OneDrive about how to communicate in these different mediums, so please check them out. So, emails as a form of research correspondence are a really great way to share, network, and recruit the participants that you need for your research. Okay? So it helps to provide access to people who will directly benefit from having taken part in your research, okay? But most importantly, they're going to enhance the quality of your research through your participation. Remember, we're trying to collect and generate all that rich knowledge and experience that they have in their minds about leadership skills and practices in the country you're investigating. So we need to be able to gain access to them and gain access to that knowledge. That's one of your big challenges here at CCBS. So, before you can even engage in that contacting, there are some steps and some questions that you can ask yourself in advance in order to prepare to communicate with people in a systematic, professional way. Okay? So firstly, you might want to think about, is email the best way to reach the people that we want to? So perhaps email isn't the best form or most used form of communication in a particular country. So try and read in advance about what is the preferred method of communication in your country. This will help save massive amounts of time for you in advance. Also think about who will potentially be included or excluded from using particular forms of communication, and other options that we might want to consider, such as LinkedIn, Facebook, and so forth. And again, in textbook, it provides examples of LinkedIn hacks and so forth that you can use in order to find out email addresses of potential respondents. And again, you need to think about what methods will you use to find people. Okay, so you might think here of mailing lists, pre-existing databases such as some Excel sheets on OneDrive. Organizational websites are another really effective way in order to identify potential respondents. And then finally, snowballing, of course. So perhaps when you secure 1 or 2 respondents, you can also ask them if they know other people who meet our sampling criteria who'd be interested to take part in the study. So lots of different techniques and things that you can use, okay? But you need to be dogged, you need to be determined, you need to be focused and systematic in your approach to this. Now, this is an example here of the step-by-step guide that you can use to hack LinkedIn. So feel free to freeze the video at this point and follow Sanders' information to gain access into as many potential respondents as possible. Now, obviously you have to conduct an audio interview with a scholar in your country, i.e. an academic who's working in your country. So a really good way in order to get someone's email address is to go to university websites. So go to universities that are based in the country that you're investigating. So the example here on the screen from Trinity College shows how you can get an email from an academic. And remember, academics are also a really nice way of trying to secure more participants for your survey. Perhaps they have links and connections and networks with business leaders in the country you're investigating based on their own research over the years. So again, they're a really useful resource, so try and use them. Now, the other things you need to consider before contacting is, will one person be sending the emails in your team? So obviously you guys have got your team division sheets, your allocated team roles. So are you going to have one person doing it, or are you going to have two people doing it? It's really important that you're clear about that in advance, okay? And I'll say why in a moment. Next, you might want to think about, what is your email strategy going to be? How many emails will you send out? Over what time period will you try to procure respondents? How will you keep track of who does and who doesn't respond? Now, that thing is actually really, really important, because remember, these are high-level professionals who are giving up their time potentially to take part in our research project. So the last thing you want to do is bother them or waste their time by having simultaneous communication going on. So keep good records. I'll talk about this in a moment, the importance of data management. So systematic correspondence is really important, okay? So this is an example of how you can be systematic in your approach. So keep an Excel sheet with all of the contact details, the names, the companies, and also people's positions within companies. But as I'll explain later, also keep track of how many times someone has been contacted, so forth. What answer did they provide? Yes, no, maybe. How many reminder letters have you sent out, and so forth. Make sure that everybody has access to this. You do not want to have the same person being contacted by multiple people. This will turn them off and you'll lose a potential respondent, both for now but also for forever, for future students, okay? So be systematic, keep your records up to date. Also, when you're about to communicate with someone, they might ask, how did you get my email address? So again, be clear in advance perhaps about how you found out about them, whether it was via LinkedIn, whether it was via a snowball technique, so whether they were recommended to you by someone else. This can often be a really nice way of gaining access to someone if they were recommended via a friend or colleague and so forth. And also, so as we outline in textbook, please don't use bulk group emails, okay? This completely undermines confidentiality and anonymity, and it can cause major problems, believe me. So individualized, customized invitation letters, please, that refer to and draw upon the specific expertise and experience of the respondent that you're trying to secure for your study. Now, as you start to think about the actual correspondence itself, what it looks like, what sort of things should be included in it, there are a number of different elements to keep in mind. So the first thing I want to talk about is the importance of a good, engaging, truthful and succinct subject line. So you want to be very clear, okay? So for example, can you inform us about leadership in your country? Or please share your knowledge and expertise with us. Overly bland, spammy, or long subject lines are often liable to be binned by potential respondents, okay? They simply look like spam, or they don't capture anybody's interest in any way. So please keep that in mind and experiment with different subheadings, okay? Different subject lines. Have a think about what's working and what isn't working. Why might that be the case, and how can you tweak and customize it in order to get better results? Have a look at other teams' invitations. What are they using? What are other best practice examples that are mentioned in textbook, for example? Follow what has worked well before, okay? Now, the next thing you might want to think about in terms of correspondence is salutations. So remember, this isn't informal communication. This is a highly formal request. So it's a formal form of communication. So please, you need to signify respect to people. These are high-level, C-level leaders who are working in the countries you're studying. So please use salutations such as dear, good day, greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and so forth. Now, given the cross-cultural nature of the course, it's also really important to customize these salutations. So do research into your country. What salutations are preferred because of the cultural backgrounds and norms in that particular country? And again, if you have a native speaker in your team or you know a native speaker in another team, try and get them to translate your invitations into the native language. This can be another effective way of making sure that you secure as many respondents as possible. Now, another thing that's incredibly important when you're corresponding with someone is to use the appropriate titles. So one of the themes we're writing about, of course, in the CPs is understanding hierarchy, and titles make up a very important part of that. So please check someone's title online before you communicate with them. So if they're a doctor, refer to them as a doctor. If they're a professor, refer to them as a professor, and so on and so forth. And this is really important because historically and currently, many people, particularly women, people of colour, and senior people in organisations, quite simply find it really disrespectful to have their title neglected. And historically, this has been a problem of Western researchers in general, who are often misspelling the names and misspelling the titles and so forth of people of colour or in people in other countries who they're investigating. So please, let's adhere to good standards here, okay? Check online in advance. Check to see what someone's preferred title is. Once they've communicated with you and responded to your invitation, have a look at how they describe themselves and copy that in future correspondence, okay? So keep your wits about you. Now, in terms of the main body of the message, what should you actually be communicating when you're trying to contact these potential respondents? Well, firstly, you want to be brief, and you need to be very brief if you're doing this in LinkedIn, for example. But you should always be brief and succinct in the message that you're giving. So you want to say who you are, okay? So depending on the respondent, you may wish to use your title and surname, or perhaps your first and last name. And then you want to talk about where you're from, okay? So you want to talk about the fact that you're conducting research on the behalf of Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. That will provide some legitimacy to the work that you're doing because you're being identified with this particular institution. So please use that in your communication with people, okay? Now, you then want to proceed to talk about what precisely it is that you're doing. So you want to succinctly explain what are you actually studying. And this is also a nice way of briefly introducing to the potential participant what it is that they are being expected of them, okay? So for example, you could say we're investigating leadership skills and practices, and your knowledge and expertise are incredibly valuable to us, okay? You then want to talk about why you are contacting them. So how you might say how you found their details, for example. You could say a colleague recommended you. If you're contacting the scholar for your audio interview, you might say, we've been reading and really enjoyed your work on leadership in the country that we're investigating, and we'd really like to hear more detail about your experience of leadership skills and practices, okay? Now remember, the people who you will be interviewing are experts and have incredible knowledge and expertise about leadership skills and practices, so you need to treat them with that respect. So a bit of buttering up always goes a long way in my estimation. Now, next you want to be concrete about what it is that you actually want them to do, okay? So you need to try and make this as inviting, persuasive, and as accessible as possible to them, okay? What do you actually want them to do? So again, if this is the initial invitation, it needs to be brief, clear, and engaging. So for example, we would like you to complete a survey. We would like to interview you to find out as much as possible about leadership in Papua New Guinea, for example. Now, next you want to try and provide a little bit of a time frame in which you'd like them to respond, okay? And also provide details of how they can confirm their interest and so forth. So, after that, you want to thank them for reading and considering your request. And again, you want to think about the salutations that are used here. So you might say yours sincerely if you used their name, for example, in the correspondence. You could say yours faithfully if you didn't do this. And you also want to thank them for their time, even just in reading the email. And perhaps suggest that you look forward to hearing from them, okay? Now remember, once you've kind of secured their participation, you're also able to provide them with a free PDF copy of the book for having taken part as well. And in the end, you want to complete by providing your full name, contact details, and again, perhaps restating that you're conducting research as part of your studies here at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Now, once you've sent out those invitations, the next stage in the research correspondence process is follow-up correspondence, okay? So if they reply and say no, for example, right? You need to think about and think of the context, think of their response and the nature of their response, and you might want to think about whether you wish to, or whether they wish to, or whether you actually need to follow up, okay? If you do feel the need to follow up, just assure them that they won't be bothered again, but perhaps they might like to take part in a future version of the survey. But again, keep it professional, don't question their decision to not take part and so forth, okay? always assure that that's the case. And again, this is why it's really important to know whether you're doing this individually or as part of a team. Okay? So please ensure that everyone is aware of and respectful of the fact that that person is no longer to be contacted. Okay? Now, other people might indicate that perhaps they're interested in taking part, but they're not quite sure if they're available at that particular period, or perhaps they require further information. No problem at all. But what you need to make sure you do here is that you're quick and concise with providing any further information and details that they need in order to secure their participation in the survey. Now, what happens if they say yes? Now, obviously, that's the desired outcome. That's what you guys are having to strive and push for, is to get people to say yes and ultimately build up the number of respondents that you get to take part in your survey. Remember, 50 is the gold standard. Now, that will be harder for some countries more so than others, but again, that's something we can take into account later when we think of the effort that your team has put in. Now, if somebody does say yes, of course, inside you might be bursting with excitement. Awesome, that's so cool, thank you so much. But again, remember, they're not your best friend, and it's still not an opportunity to necessarily be informal with someone. So again, maintain your professionalism, and again, be ready to send out whatever information they need in order to secure their participation and so forth. Now, if they don't reply, again, there's a set of procedures that I'd like you to try and adhere to make sure that you keep things professional while still trying to work away and secure more respondents for your survey. Okay? So one way in which you can do this is to send a friendly reminder. And again, you may want to include that in your subject line heading, for example. Friendly reminder to take part in a survey, for example. Okay? But what I would say is perhaps only do this once or twice. Now, this is why it's so important to engage in good data management practices. You want to be clear about how many times someone has been contacted. The last thing you want is for somebody to email you saying they've had 5, 6 emails and that they feel pestered, okay? So you need to strike that balance between being determined, dogged, and also systematic and respectful of people's time. Now, one thing you might see is if this seems to be happening a lot, that you aren't hearing anything back, it might be important to check if the email is the problem. So is it going to their spam inbox, for example? Or perhaps email is not the best recruitment tool, in which case you might want to think of other potential mediums through which you can contact people. LinkedIn, Facebook, and any other form of kind of social networking that you can think of. Now, here is the data management that I was talking about. So you can see here the example of the Excel sheet on the screen. And again, you want to be clear about exactly what your survey respondents have said. Did they indicate yes, no, maybe? If you followed up with people, what number of reminder letter are you at? 1 or 2? And again, what was the outcome after you followed up? Was it yes, no, maybe? Or was it SNR? In other words, still no reply. Okay? So it's really important to record this as part of your ongoing data management. So again, allocate this specific role to someone in your team. And make sure that you're clear about how many people are communicating so people aren't being pestered, okay? Now, remember, templates and examples of these invitations are all available in the download folder on OneDrive, specifically the SurveyMonkey Tools folder. So please have a look at these example templates. But remember, we need you to customize these, tailor these, perhaps translate these and make them local and specific to the business leaders in the countries that you are studying. Okay? Now, doing this and doing this well reassures us that you guys are a good team that we can give the survey link to as quickly as possible. So the better these invitations are, the quicker you can start emailing survey respondents, and the quicker you can start collecting data and using that data and synthesizing that data in your CPs in future drafts. Now, here's the folder here I was referring to, SurveyMonkey Tools. And as you can see, there's lots of other folders which are jam-packed with information that will help you with every stage of the research process. So please look through these folders first before communicating with Xander and myself to ask about some of these things. Have a look at all those resources that are already there on OneDrive and also in textbook, okay? We try to think of as many questions as possible in advance and provide you with all of this information to guide you. So please check it out, okay? And this is an example of a template. which is available on OneDrive. So have a look through this, okay? So pause the screen here, have a look in your own time, and customize this, tweak it, and tailor it to the specific country that you're looking at, okay? Now, finally, I just want to talk about the issue of consent. So remember, either in audio form or written form, you will need to secure informed consent from the participants. And this is just them confirming that they're aware of what the study is about, how their information will be used. And also, it's an opportunity for them to say whether they want to be anonymized in the data. Now remember, there's a spectrum of anonymity. Some people may want to be fully anonymized. Some people may not want to have their name, but they're happy to have their position and organization mentioned. Some people will be completely happy to give their full name, position, and organization that they work for. And this is the ideal, of course, because it helps to provide more legitimacy, more status to the CCBS survey. But obviously, it's up to the participants themselves. So make sure that they're available what they're being asked to do and that they give their informed consent. And again, there is a specific template for this on OneDrive. You can have a look at here. This is for audio and video recording consent form. Okay. So again, pause it here, have a look at it on OneDrive, customize it and tweak it to fit your specific country. Now, with that, again, I just want to point you to some examples of best practice email invitations and LinkedIn invitations from last semester. So again, it's a good idea perhaps here just to pause the lecture and some of the next screens and read through these in your own time. Okay? Here they are. So these are from Team Bahamas last year. So these are examples of follow-up letters, second reminders, also thank you letters where they then go on to provide the survey link to the respondents, and also an example of LinkedIn invitations. So again, first message, second message, third message. And obviously stylistically, you can see the difference in style in these messages because of the character limits on LinkedIn. So it's important to be flexible, customize, and tailor your correspondence to fit the medium that you're using. So again, try and allocate this job to one particular person in your team who has experience and expertise in communicating across a broad variety of mediums. Now, with that, guys, if you have any questions about what I've talked about in today's lecture, please just ask them below the Facebook post and the link to the YouTube video. Okay? Thanks a lot, guys. See you next week, either on Zoom or in person. Have a great day. Bye-bye.